Welcome everyone. I'm going to do a talk now on the Beguine Sisters, who were medieval Christian female mystics, part of my series where I'm going to look into some of the female mystics from different traditions. I've already done Hypatia, so it's going to be a share screen. So the Beguines were women who voluntarily adopted a life of chastity, prayer, and meditation without joining any kind of religious order. Some lived a solitary lifestyle, and others lived in communities called Beguinages. This is a modern version of one, I think. This is in Bruges, in Belgium. There was no formal contract drawn up, and members could leave if they felt they needed to, but most remained dedicated to the cause. The origins were with a man named Lambert le Begue in the 12th century AD, who founded the male version, the Beghards, in Belgium. This inspired some women of the time to found the Beguine Sisterhood, and very soon spread over the whole of Europe, especially the Netherlands. The communities gave women a wider range of opportunities. Besides the spiritual pursuits, there was spinning various handicrafts, and even administering to the sick and the poor. It was inevitable, unfortunately, that the Orthodox Church would look upon such feminine freedom of action unfavorably. Early in the 14th century, many of the women were burned as heretics after the movement was condemned at the Council of Vienne in 1311. However, during the life of the Beguine Sisterhood, much beautiful poetry and writing was produced as a result of their devotion to the spiritual quest. One of the chief members was Hedwig of Antwerp or Brabant. The Duchy of Brabant was an area straddling the Netherlands and Belgium. None of these countries existed at the time of her life, which was mid-13th century. In fact, very little is known of her actual life. Only her writings remain as a testament. These consist of a book of visions, poems, letters, and other miscellaneous writings. In her love poetry, she imitated the Minnesingers, who were German troubadours from the 12th to the 14th century AD. These were the singers of songs to their lady, and they spoke of courtly love. Their words were more sensually based, but she, Hedwig, and other Beguines used their methods for spiritual ends. Much of her poetry was heavily influenced by Orthodox Christian thought, the Christian thought of the time, but she often touched on concepts that were obviously spiritual or theosophical. Unfortunately, there is some doubt as to the authenticity of some of her writings, and it is impossible to tell at times which belonged to her and which were added later in her name. This has been the fate of many writers from all traditions throughout the ages. But many of the poems attributed to her show a remarkable insight, as in this one. And the first of these is, "You who want knowledge, seek the oneness within. There you will find the clear mirror already waiting. And this could easily have been written by a Sufi, a Buddhist, or a Hindu. And many of her poems have a similar leaning, as in the second one. The madness of love is a blessed fate. And if we understood this, we would seek no other. It brings into unity what was divided. And this is the truth. Bitterness, it makes sweet. It makes the stranger a neighbor. And what was lowly, it raises on high. And this is more evidence of the identical nature of the experiences of the mystics of various traditions. It must have been difficult for Hedwig to accurately express her understandings, as she did not have the luxury of the awareness of other ways of thought as we do. Language was much more limited then than it is now, and she had to make use of the tools that she had at the time. It is interesting, too, that she often refers to love in a feminine sense, as in this poem. In the beginning, love satisfies us. When love first spoke to me of love, how I laughed at her in return. But then she made me like the hazel trees, which blossom early in the season of darkness and bear fruit slowly. So in this, she speaks of the trials of love, which will come to all spiritual aspirants when they will be tested. And the talisman in these times is patience sweet that naught can ruffle, as the voice of the silence tells us. In modern times, I suspect most of these women would be dedicated to the goddess principle. At some point, she was criticized for her views, perhaps forced out of her community and separated from women for whom she cared. Her need to keep in touch with them and to continue to teach and encourage them seems to have led to her writings: 31 letters, 14 descriptions of visions, 45 poems in stanzaic form, and 16 to 29 poems in mixed form. Hedwig also compiled a list of the perfect, naming 86 persons, living and dead, whom she described as clothed in love. The list includes a Beguine who had been executed, probably in 1236. A recent French film entitled Hedwig gives a modern spin on the story. Celine is a novice nun in modern France, whose fanatical devotion leads her to be expelled from the convent in a similar way to the original. She had taken on the name Hedwig during her novitiate. After leaving, she meets a young Muslim. She tells him that she must remain pure, as her only love is for Jesus. He introduces her to his brother and is eventually coaxed into an act of terrorism. The shock of this becomes cathartic to her in her spiritual journey. Some of Hedwig's poetry is used in this film, and there are some parallels with her life. Like many of the devotional mystics, such as Mirabai in India and Rumi in ancient Persia, there is much talk of the suffering of love being essential to its ultimate understanding. There is the fire of love and the pain of separation that must be endured for the soul to be refined. It is similar to St. John of the Cross's dark night of the soul. No genuine mystical awakening can come about without some resistance from the lower nature, which dislikes change and also dislikes slipping out of its comfort zone. Stepping from one's conventional way of life into a more expansive one requires shedding a few skins, or to emerge like a butterfly from its confining chrysalis. The fact that the Beguine Sisters knew the danger of their actions and were prepared to die for them is mirrored in the modern world by women in the Middle East, who are courting death by championing the rights of girls to have a decent education. Perhaps the goal is not as lofty as that of the Beguines, but the passion is there, and the belief that good will triumph in the end. So another major figure in the movement was Beatrice of Nazareth. She didn't hail from Nazareth, of course, but also from the Brabant. She was born in 1200 and came from a wealthy merchant family. She had a Latin education with the Beguines at Zutlieu in Belgium. Although she studied with them for a while, she eventually followed a more orthodox route and took vows as a Cistercian, eventually becoming prioress of the convent of Our Lady of Nazareth in Lier, Belgium. She also spent some time at the monastery of La Ramée, where she met up with Ida of Neveleis. He was a mystic, and Beatrice herself had some mystical experiences there, which shaped her future writings. In 1236 AD, she wrote a work entitled The 7 Ways of Divine Love. In this work, Beatrice describes in very poetic and beautiful language the various stages through which we must pass to merge into love in its truest sense. Concerning this love, she writes, "It happens sometimes that a sweet and joyful love is awakened in the heart and swells like a great wave through the soul by itself without any effort at all on our part. One is so powerfully moved by love, so passionately drawn up into love, so strongly taken by love, so tenderly embraced and utterly mastered by love, that she surrenders herself entirely to its power. In this embrace, the soul experiences directly the radiance of the divine, a wonderful bliss, pure freedom, ecstatic sweetness, complete overpowering by love, a waterfall of ineffable delight. She feels that all her senses are sacred, and she is so totally engulfed by love and so deeply immersed in love that she is one with love and will never cease to be love. For the beauty of love has clothed her, the power of love has submerged her, the holiness of love has consumed her, the greatness of love has so sublimely drawn her into herself that she will always love and do nothing but acts of love." Like Hedwig, she also writes of the suffering that such a journey may bring, but urges the aspirant to hold on to love through every trial if one is to be triumphant. So it is useful to look up the 7 ways of divine love, either in book form or online, as a short talk can never do it justice, and more detailed accounts of her interesting life are available. Let's just look at these 7 ways of divine love. I'm not sure if you can read that, but it says 1 is The first way is a fierce longing engendered by love. Before the soul can overcome every resistance to it, this yearning must develop gradually so that it rules the heart fully. Then she can work in strength and intelligence with the courage to grow in love. Number 2, the soul is given a second way of love. Sometimes she serves the Lord for nothing, only from love, without reason or reward, even of mercy or bliss. The third way of love is a way of pain and misery. The good soul may come to this way if she wants to react fully to love, to follow love with reverence, service, honor, and worship. 4 is the fourth way of love. It is sometimes given in great delight and sometimes in great pains. Love may be pleasantly awakened in the soul and may lift it up with great happiness, so that love moves in the heart without any human aid. 5, alternatively, love can be awakened powerfully, arising with overpowering recklessness and great passion. This is the fifth way of love. It is as if she wanted to break the heart of the soul by brute force, tear the soul out and lose herself in the purging fire of love. 6, when the bride of our Lord has made progress and has achieved this greater salvation, she experiences a sixth way of love, closely connected and with higher knowledge. And 7, the blessed soul has a more sublime way of love, a seventh way, which gives her much to do within. She is being raised above the human measure of love, above senses and reason, higher than everything of which our heart is capable on its own. So we can see that no matter what the tradition, the mystic always ends up at this transcendental love that falls under no category. It's the same experience for all, no matter what tradition or religion they follow. Which is very interesting. And Beatrice passed from this world in 1268. So the final person in this trio is Mctill of Magdeburg. And she was born in 1220 of a noble family, where she learned the graces of courtly love. But in her late teens, she left home to join the Beguines at Magdeburg, Germany. She stayed with them for the next 40 years until, in old age, she joined the Cistercian convent at Helfta, where her sister, Mctill of Magdeburg, was mistress of the novices. It is thought that it was the persecution of the Orthodox Church that drove her to make that decision. Her main work was poetically titled "The Flowing Light of the Godhead." One can see the common mystical element in this quote from the book. "I cannot dance, O Lord, unless you lead me. If thou wilt that I leap joyfully, then must thou thyself first dance and sing. Then will I leap for love, from love to knowledge, from knowledge to fruition, from fruition to beyond all human sense. There will I remain and circle evermore." So we can see here again the transcendence beyond the different stages of love to a transcendent state. The book is actually much more rooted in traditional Christian ideas than some of the other writings mentioned in this talk. But still, the deeper mystical element shines through at times. And of course, the number 7 crops up a few times, too, as in this quote. The eyes that are to see me thus must be graced by 7 things, otherwise they can never experience it. These are slow to borrow, quick to pay back, to hold back nothing for yourself, to be kind in the face of hatred, to be loving in the face of cruelty, to be pure as to guilt, and ready for all one might receive. Her criticism of church dignitaries, religious laxity, and claims to theological insight aroused so much opposition that some called for the burning of her writings. With advancing age, she was not only alone and the object of much criticism, but she also became blind. Around 1272, as said, she joined the Cistercian nunnery at Elfta, who offered her protection and support in the final years of her life, and where she finished writing down the contents of the many divine revelations she had experienced. Mctill's writings are formed of the 7 books that constitute the flowing light of divinity that I mentioned, which was composed between 1250 and 1280. What is unusual about her writings is that she composed her work in Middle Low German at a time when most wisdom literature was composed in Latin. Thus she is remembered as an early proponent and popularizer of German as a language worthy of the divine and the holy. It is unclear when Mctill died. 1282 is a commonly cited date, but some scholars believe she lived into the 1290s. It seems that even these Christian-orientated women had some intuition of the importance of the number 7, as of other deep spiritual truths. The flowing light of the Godhead itself is divided into 7 books. The theosophical definition of meditation is the inexpressible yearning of the inner man or woman to go out towards the infinite. And certainly these women had these yearnings, even if, due to the times they lived in, they interpreted them as a union with a personal God. In moments of divine ecstasy, they almost certainly went beyond all these concepts. But on returning to the normal consciousness, they translated their experiences into the vernacular of the times they lived in. It is interesting to look into the lives of women like the Beguines, as it shows that all throughout history, women have striven to prove their spiritual equality with men despite persecution, and that they were willing even to be put to death for their beliefs. There were also many female mystics outside of the Beguine ages who also took a similar stance. Many of them eventually followed a more conventional religious route. Some left to become wives and mothers, but a few went on to the very end. As their writings show, it was love that inspired them and a strong desire to merge with the very source of that love. And I'm sure some of them succeeded in doing just that. So as I was looking at earlier, this book, Visions and Longings, Medieval Women Mystics by Monica Furlong, is one of the books that helped me to put this talk together. And it's a very good book. It's recommended by me. And the second one is Women in Praise of the Sacred, which is 43 Centuries of Spiritual Poetry by Women, edited by Jane Hirschfield. So that is the end of that. Hope you enjoyed this brief talk on the Beguines, and hopefully I can bring you some more talks very shortly. Om Shanti, 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 peace, 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 peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.